inside the header for the raw data file coming off the camera. So you have the image temperature, which is recorded in the file. Then you'll also have the ambient temperature and humidity level in the file. It does that because it will also tell you when you have a danger of dew forming on your glass. If you can set an alarm to pop up and tell you when you're within so many degrees of the dew point. Now, there's some neat tools here. You can look at histograms. It'll show you red, green, blue histogram. For shooting astrophotography, the histogram, it starts on the bottom left, that's black. On the bottom right is white. And you just count the number of pixels at each value, and they stack up. If it's down at the bottom of the graph, then there's 0 pixels at that value. 0 on the left, 255 on the right. When you shoot, you want the entire curve off of the left margin and off of the right margin. If you have any of that histogram touching the left side, that means you've got some pixels that are 0, and you got some pixels at 1, and you got some pixels at 2, and you're losing data because the exposure is not long enough to pick up enough pixels to get that off of 0. You can't tell the data from the black. On the other hand, if you have your exposure set too long, you'll have the histogram pushed against the right-hand side, which means you're blowing out the image. You've got some pixels that are saturated, they're 255, and you can't tell if they're really white or is it just your exposure too long. And then you try to shoot a galaxy, and there's nothing you can do to keep it from being both. Anybody ever done any HDR photography? Yeah, same idea applies. You shoot some at a high ISO to try to get the darks, and you shoot some in the middle, and you shoot some at the top end, and you load it in the stacking software, and it will do the same. It'll do your HDR for you. It'll stack 3 separate groups, and then it'll combine them. Okay? But you can look at the histogram here to see what your histogram looks like instead of having to look at the camera. I don't know about you guys, but when a camera or something's plugged on the telescope, it's not always in the easiest angle to look at. Right? The general APT settings, focus aid, bot knob mask. If you've ever seen a bot knob mask, it's a bunch of slots cut in a piece of plastic or something in front of your lens. This has tools to assist in that focusing. A framing mask is when you shoot one image. Let's say on Monday night you shoot an image, and you shoot all night long, but you didn't get enough data. So you're going to come back Tuesday and pick up where you left off. So you take your rig and everything. Tuesday night you come back out, you point at the same star. You really want to be framed exactly the same way. You don't want to have the image shift suddenly 30 or 40 pixels off to the side. So you throw up a framing mask, which is the last picture you shot the night before, or the first picture from the night before. But anyway, it'll throw that up at about a 50% brightness, and it'll overlay the current image when the telescope is pointed on top of it. You can then adjust the telescope and the focus and everything to get the same image as you had when you ended the day before. So when you start that sequence, they look like they're the same. There's some collimation aids. I've never used a collimation aid, the pixel aid, but one thing I do use is DARV. Right? This is a drift and alignment. It's a drift alignment. What you do is you click the button, and this is the only reason I paid for this software. I click align the azimuth. Well, I'm not connected to a telescope now, but I click align azimuth, and it says, okay. And it finds a star. And it moves the azimuth, not the azimuth, it moves the right ascension and declination just a little, and it stops. And it watches that star track. See, it'll move the right ascension a little bit, and the declination a little bit, then it'll stop, it'll watch the star track, and it will tell you if your right ascension and declination is moving. It'll know that the altitude and azimuth is off. And what you have to do is, to start with, you have to pick a star that is like right at the equator, the celestial equator, near zenith. And when you find one up there, the idea is if it's drifting, that star is getting farther and farther and farther away from the equator. And it knows it, and it tells you, it'll draw a dot with a line on it, and here's a star, here's where it ought to be, and you adjust your azimuth knobs in live, and as you adjust it, it's bringing that star back, and you get as close as you can. Then you do the altitude. You swing over the horizon, you find the star nearer where the equator hits the horizon, do the same thing. It'll track it for a minute, then it'll draw the star, it'll draw where it should be, and put a line between them, and it'll say, adjust your azimuth or your altitude now to get it over there. And you go back and forth a couple of times, and pretty soon, after, and I've only had to do this twice, an altitude and twice an azimuth, the next time it would do it, that star shows up right in the center of that little circle. So the star is right exactly where it should be. And I spent 3 hours one night out at Cliff Hills Farm trying to polar align my telescope. I saw this, I paid, well, whatever it was, I think it was $50 or $49 or whatever for the shareware. The next time I was out there with Wes Schwartz, I did it in less than 20 minutes. And I was imaging, and I did it right at sunset. I was imaging really just about the time it got dark enough to be imaging, I was imaging. So this is a handy dandy little tool. Okay, now, that's all I use this for. This software is the alignment. You can use it to collect data. You can tell what images, you can see imaging folders. See if you want to look at an old image and call up an old image to look at it and use controls on the old image you took, like histograms and stuff, you can. But the Astro Photography tool and the Backyard EOS are used to control and gather your data. PhD guiding is the go-to control to control where the telescope and how the telescope actually tracks the star field. A piece of software that comes with Backyard EOS is Backyard Red. You notice how my screen would kill your night vision in the field? That won't. All it does is it just changes everything to the reds, and you can turn up the intensity level along with the brightness of the laptop, and it actually saves your night vision some. Okay. Now, this Temper-Hum is another piece of software that I run. This is to control that little temperature humidity device, which you can buy on eBay. That's like $22. Polar Finder, free download. Looking through a polariscope. Let's see where that tell it. Yep. There we go. Time of day, how many charts I want, longitude, set all that stuff. If I'm looking through my polariscope, there's Polaris at 9:08 at night, 10:08 at night, 11:08 at night. So if you point your telescope to north, you have a little polar scope in there, it's got the little reticle. Sometimes it's real hard to get your telescope twisted to where it should be. It's not always convenient, especially when you have a big rig, trying to twist everything to get that hole open and everything aligned. But you can look at this and see if I'm looking vertical, up, looking straight at Polaris, that's where it ought to be in my viewfinder, in that polar scope. This was free. I like free stuff. DSLR shutter is software that the only thing it is meant to do is control the camera. It doesn't do anything with telescope. It just, you can set it up on a tripod just to shoot pictures of a football game. EOS camera movie record is handy if you're going to shoot planetary work with a Canon EOS camera, because the video files that the camera defaults to, if you just want to point it and set the video mode and pull the trigger, it's useless. You can't use it. The gain controls are automatic. There's audio buried in there. There's the color correction is all messed up. I've never ever gotten a decent video image by using the built-in software on the camera. Wes Schwartz pointed this out to me, which was free. When you run it, you essentially are just controlling the camera video recording functions with the computer, but it's pulling off in RAW mode and making a different kind of file that's not compressed, it's not corrected, doesn't have audio in it, and it's great and runs straight into things like, I can't think of the name of that software now, PixInsight and some of the other ones that are used to stack planetary stuff. I don't do planetary, I don't know. I haven't had time to use that yet, haven't been in the field with it. Stellarium, and I am getting to stacking in just a minute, by the way. Stellarium, I'm assuming that everybody's basically familiar with it, but just to show you something real quick, this is what I use in the field. Instead of the go-to functions on the mount, I use Stellarium because I can point to stuff that's not normally there. Not normally there in the mount. In Stellarium, oh, here's a good example. There's Comet Lovejoy right there. There it is. You can use Stellarium to control your telescope mount. All you have to do is go to the configurations, go to the plugins, telescope control, click configure, and telescopes. Now, I just installed this, so you can type your telescope, whatever you want to call it. I have a USB to serial port adapter for my USB cable that runs to my mount. So I can control the mount through here, and I just look at my device manager in Windows Control Panel and see what COM port I'm plugged into. I use the Celestron Nexstar compatible